Imagine going from doing no podcast interviews to doing 75 in a period of 10 to 12 months with breaks in between. Well, that's exactly what happened to my next guest, Sandy, who has written a book. She's used podcast as a way to get on the platform and get her message out to market. Hi, this is Kathleen Gage with the podcast Rockstar Club. And I encourage you, stick around because you're going to learn a lot from somebody who a year ago had never been on a podcast show, and now she's an in-demand guest.
Where people are going to just, go after me on my topic and question, my motives. And I was kind of afraid of the questions, I think, initially. And I think there's also when this isn't, I had done some public speaking. So it's one thing to stand in front of a crowd and have a prepared speech and you really kind of know what your topic is and what you're going to talk about. But to put yourself out there on a live program where people are going to just start asking you questions, that was a little nervous wracking for me. I was a little nervous about that. But you had convinced me that this would be something that I could do. And you guided me in a way that showed me here's the steps to take. So I started to get a little more confident that if I can do this, here's what I need to do. And it really did help promote the book. In fact, last night I had an interview. And the week before I had one, and both of them promoted the book way beyond what I would have normally done myself on a podcast. In fact, the one last week, she read at least 4 or 5 excerpts from the book itself and went on about the book. So I felt like that when I was on a book tour with her. And that was, that was very exciting and encouraging. And so there are a lot of, it's not just about a message and promoting, but, you can also see from your podcasters that they are interested in your topic.
Absolutely. I did an interview recently with a woman who is all about plant-based and vegan business ethics, and her interview went live yesterday. And I always promote my episodes. When I have a guest, I do a lot of promoting. I was shocked at how much she promoted, but she's a marketing person. So it didn't surprise me. But the thing about podcasts, like what you said with your book, is that sometimes the hosts will go way above and beyond, and they're giving you so much traction. And, I'd love to actually, in a few minutes, we'll talk about book tours, because right now with the pandemic still raging out of control, we don't know what's going to happen in 2021. In a perfect world, an author could get out there and go to bookstores and make appearances, do speaking engagements. That's not happening right now. And so I do want to have a conversation about book tours, but let's start with what you had to do in order to overcome your own resistance to being on podcast shows.
Well, I think one thing, I was motivated. I knew that my message was important. I knew my story had value to other victims and to other people who might need to understand this topic. So I was motivated, and I think it was just a matter of, okay, this is something I need to do, so figure out how to do it. And I've listened to a couple of the other guests, and one of the things that's, the same repetitive theme is just do it. You just have to get out there and make yourself do it. You're not going to be perfect. But I've also found that hosts aren't perfect either, so, and I think the other thing that helped me was to understand, while I'm nervous, the host may not be as nervous as I am, but they don't want a dud show either. They want that show to be good as well. So, I can help them by being prepared. I can help them by being a good guest. And so some of the things that you have taught me showed me how to be a good guest and what I needed to do. And once you start doing that, just like anything in life, there's always hesitation with something new, but you just do it and you get better at it as you go along and you figure it out a little bit better each time.
Well, look at you right now. I mean, you are a perfect guest right now because I'm asking you questions that are not prepared questions. We're having a conversation. And as you share something, I think of, I want to cover X, Y, and Z, whatever that may be. And we're getting a few comments here. Honey says, wait a minute. Okay, we'll get better by watching the pros, okay? And you get better by jumping in, honey. It's not just watching the pros, but definitely you want to have mentors and coaches. And honey also says, that's how I feel. Just do it. Yvonne says, you do that. Kathleen Gage, you give above and beyond for everyone. And Yvonne says, yes, hosts aren't perfect either. It's so nice when they're authentic and down to earth. And, you know, that's a big thing because when you are looking for shows, what's your process for finding shows? Let's start with that, and then let's talk about your equipment, because initially you didn't have any equipment. We got you set up with that.
Well, let me just talk about the equipment because that's my pet peeve. You know, I immediately did exactly what you said. I need to get a good camera. I need a good lighting, a good mic, all of those things that when I see professionals on television with these blurry images or the glare in their glasses or the lighting is horrible, it really distracts from your message. It takes away because you can't focus on what the person's saying. It's like, you know, it's answering the door in your bathrobe or answering the door when you look nice. You're still the same person, but there's something about the way you look and the way you present yourself that's going to have an impact on how people respond to you. So I absolutely tell people when they've talked about it, you've got to have good lighting and a good camera. And that's, to me, is the number one thing. Now I think I went off track because you were going back for another question.
Well,
before.
and in addition to having the good lighting, with the good equipment overall, what's your process for finding shows to be on?
First, I went on iTunes like you suggested. And then the other tip that you gave me was, okay, look for guests who've been on shows and then see what other shows that they have been on. I've also joined two podcast groups. They're not that expensive, but they are, you know, they do cost a little bit of money. One is podmatch.com, and I've gotten a lot from them. The only I would say disadvantage to that one is it's a lot of new podcasters. So I have to be aware that when I look at the topics that they cover, the topics might work, but I'm not sure the guest or the host is always going to be. But I will sometimes take one, even though I don't think the host has had that many shows, just as for practice for myself. And you never know where it's going to lead. So I don't always turn them down just based on the fact that, okay, this one doesn't look like they've done this very often.
Right.
I don't. And then you also encourage me to think out of the box. So my topic is pretty specific, but I could look at topics under women's issues. I could look for authors. I could look under overcoming adversity, which, you know, instead of just plugging into a spirituality or religion, I needed to look outside the box. And so that was also a help.
Well, and that's something that I always encourage people to look at is all the different hooks and angles that will get you on a show. Great example is the woman who was on my show yesterday. We talked about people that want to turn their passion into a business, even though the show is about eating healthy. And so it's really looking at the different angles that you can get on a show with. And I loved what you said about the newer podcasters, that sometimes you'll go on a show simply for more opportunity and more experience, because you never do know where that's going to go. Wayne Dyer, great example. He actually got discovered on an AM radio show by the producer of the Johnny Carson show. Now, some of us know who Johnny Carson is. Other people are going, who's Johnny Carson? Okay, that shows your age. But Johnny Carson in his day was the biggest nighttime show host. I mean, he had been around for 25 years? And Wayne Dyer was truly discovered on an AM radio show when he was literally driving from location to location to be on a radio show to sell his books, which actually ties in very nicely with podcast tours, a book tour. Right now with the pandemic, I really encourage people, take advantage of the downtime of going out into public and use podcast interviews as an opportunity to get your name out there and your message out there. Where do you see in 2021 your opportunities as far as like doing a podcast tour? What would you do to plan one out, and what would you recommend to other people who are just starting out with podcast shows?
So I'm trying to understand your question.
The question basically is let's say you're going to do a podcast tour in 2021.
And you mean by tour?
like
just
going to more podcasts
Podcasts.
within
Okay.
a very short period of
Gotcha.
time.
Okay.
And you know what? Thank you for that. Thank you for asking for clarification, because sometimes a host might ask us a question and we're going, what did they just say? And, you know, my mind tends to go in a number of different directions. So thank you for that filtering down. But if you were to do a tour of, let's say, 20 shows, and you wanted to do those within a 30-day period, let's just hypothetically give you a scenario, what would your process be for planning something like that out?
Well, first I would start looking for all the podcasts that fit into the category, which I would fit. And then you got to send them out, and you've got to have your pitch. You've got to have it perfected. Then you have to tweak it to certain podcasts, because they're not all going to fit in the same genre. You're going to have to say, okay, if you're looking for authorship, so you say, here's the book I've written. If you're looking for someone who's talking about healing, then you change that. So you keep in mind, you can't just copy and paste whatever your pitch is, I think.
Right.
But I think it's just, I mean, what I have found, Kathleen, is that if I want 100 podcasts, I can probably get them if I work at it. If I only want 20, I get 20. So it really is, I mean, I have been amazed at when I'm really gun-ho, you know, the podcast will come to me. Or if I'm kind of laid back and I'm thinking that, you know, because of my topic, sometimes I have to back off a little bit. It's because it's an emotional draining for me at times. So, and even if you're on a topic that's not, you know, podcasts are work. So, you know, I don't want people to feel like they have to do every podcast they find, because it can be, you know, draining. It can be a lot of work, and you want to be good when you're on a podcast. You don't want to get on there and be, you know, this is like another podcast and I really didn't want to do this today. You know, you want to be fresh, and you want to do it because you want to do it, not because you feel like, well, I should do this because the opportunity is there.
Right.
So I would say, you know, I think you have to find those podcasts, go after them, and then follow up. Because sometimes I've had 2 podcasts where they didn't respond back, and I followed up. I did get a podcast from both of them.
Nice.
The follow-up's important.
What's been one of the strangest things that's happened on a podcast show?
Probably once when I had a host, and I think I was only her second podcast, and if she was 12, I would have guessed her to be at least 9. I mean, she was so off the wall and giddy, and I just love your book, and it's so much fun. Oh, wow. And she jumped topics, and I was like, okay, how do I keep track of this woman? I don't know what to say or what to do next. So it was interesting, but it certainly was a difficult interview. But obviously, this was like not something she had perfected and even close to being perfecting. So that was a little strange. I was actually then she'd stop and I'd say, was there something else you'd like to ask? Or, you know, it was just interesting. That was probably the strangest.
What's been the best interview that you've had?
Gosh, I think there's 3 that I can think of off the top of my head, but I would say Jimmy Hinton, his was very good. And actually he asked me to come back to do part 2.
Nice.
So that I've had that happen twice, where they've asked me to come back as a guest. The Safe Sanctuary, she was very good. So those 2, I think in particular, stuck out in my mind.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay. And what do you do after the fact to promote the episodes that you've been on? You've gotten the permalink from the host to the episode. Is there anything that you do personally to make sure?
Well, of course, I put them on all my social media pages, but I'm also sort of on the board of Council on Child Abuse here in Cincinnati.
Oh, okay.
So I send those out to those people. That's my link, and I'll send them to all the board members. When I do some Zooms for different groups, I will make sure that that's mentioned. So I try to promote it as much as I can. And I think that's important not only for the host, but for me as well.
Okay. And we've got Colleen that just said hi to both of us. And Honey Smith says podcaster. She loves that term. And she also said coal miner's daughter strategy. I'm not sure what you mean by that, Honey. But, you know, if you could let us know. And if you have questions, go ahead and post your questions on the wall. And, you know, so what would you say to the people that they're in the podcast Rockstar Club, but they've done nothing to go through the training? What do you have to say to those people?
Well, first of all, when you have an expert such as yourself, listen to them. I mean, now I will say one thing. There was one piece of advice that I didn't take that I regretted.
Which was?
That was, you said early on, now, when you get these podcasts, you make sure you keep track of them, put them in a file, keep them when you contacted them, the host information, all the things that you need about this, keep track of them in a file on your computer. Well, first of all, I'm thinking, okay, I'm not going to get that many podcasts. This is the beginning. I'm thinking I can keep track of a few podcasts. Wrong. So I would definitely keep that piece of advice and tell everyone you need to keep track of your podcast, because you will lose track of when they were contacted. And then I'm thinking, okay, was that Diana or was that Kathy that contacted me? So yeah, that piece of advice I didn't take. So any advice that you get from someone who's been podcasting, such as myself or other people, you want to listen to them. Certainly your advice and your training is fabulous. I mean, it's really textbook of how to do the best you can on podcasts and how to get it on podcasts.
Excellent. And Honey Smith asks, how do you do it? I'm not sure what you mean by that, Honey. If you're talking about keeping a list of the podcasts you've been on, one of the things that I would recommend that you all do is, and start this from the beginning. When you get a podcast episode, put it on your website, either you or your web person, that they hyperlink it, they put it on the media page, because that serves a number of purposes. One is it's done. As soon as you do it, it's done. And trust me, it can get out of control fast, especially if you're doing a tour and you're doing 2 or 3 shows a day. I've done that. About a week ago, I think in a matter of 3 days, I did something like 6 or 7. Either I was being interviewed or I was interviewing people, and it got out of control. And I've been doing this for a long time. Yeah. So you want to put it up on your media page, and that's also social proof to other hosts that they can see that you are really a low risk to them. Because the greatest concern that a host has is that you're a risk. So let's actually look at that, Sandy. If a host asks you, what is it that you will talk about? What are you going to bring to the experience? How do you address that for them?
Well, I always tell them that even though my topic is on clergy sexual abuse, it's also about healing and moving forward. So I don't want them to be scared by the topic itself, because it's more than just about the abuse. I mean, that's a good part of it, obviously, but there is hope and healing for victims. And then I talk about, how church leadership can handle cases of clergy abuse when it happens within their church. So I try to make sure they understand the topic can be broader than just abuse.
A question is, and I think this is really important for people to hear what your answer on this is. Have you ever had a situation that for outward appearances, it seemed like this was it was going to be okay, but something in you said, I can't do this interview because something, your red flags came up. Have you ever had that happen?
I've had it happen once where after listening to the podcast, which is why it's so important to listen to podcasts, because it may not be a good fit. And so I decided not to do that podcast. Interestingly enough, I have one that's coming up that he's from India, and his audience doesn't speak English, but he's going to translate it. Now, that's not going to sell my book, but it is my message still. And I hesitated on that a little bit because I thought, how's this going to be translated? But I decided to go for it. So that's going to happen next week.
Oh, okay.
I was hesitant, but I'm going to do it and see what happens. There was another podcast that the title threw me off. I didn't like his title. I thought, I'm not sure this guy, because this isn't about pastor bashing. My message isn't about hurting the church, so he sounded a little, I don't know, rebellious maybe is the word. I don't know.
Okay.
But I listened to his podcast, and it was one of my better podcasts. He was a great host, and he was very, very good. So it's like one of those things, don't judge a book by its cover.
Okay. Okay.
But I think you have to listen to the podcast. You have to listen to their podcast.
Absolutely. Because if you listen to it, then you can get an idea for their interview style, their level of experience, how comfortable they are, and also just the format of the podcast. And I would encourage people, if you have questions, go ahead and put your questions in. And Colleen says that she uses an Excel spreadsheet. And Honey Smith says, every time I see a SNAP, capital SASNAP letter in the mail, my heart blackens. I'm not sure what is a SNAP.
SNAP is the Survivors Network Against Abusive Priests.
Okay.
And they're nationwide, and they have been very advocates against the priest on sexual abuse, and it's a huge organization. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so I would encourage people, if you have questions, go ahead and put the questions in the chat area. Because we can't bring you onto this live. That's just kind of the way it's structured. But Sandy, what else can you advise to people?
Well, one of the other things that I do with my podcast is after I listen to them, I keep track of the different questions I'm asked. So each time I'm asked a new question, I keep track of that question, and I watch myself to see how I answered it, and could I have answered it better, or did I even answer the host question? Sometimes I think, okay, that's not what she was really asking, after I listened to it a second time. So keeping track of all those questions has been helpful to me. It helps me prepare for the next time if the same question's asked over again.
Nice.
I think, taking your advice, because you're the expert, and you should listen to what they have to say, because that's where you're going to excel. You're gonna get better each time by doing what you're told to do by someone who knows, who's been there.
Excellent. And I want to remind people that you are listening to the Facebook Live for the podcast Rockstar Club. If you're not a member, because this will go up on YouTube, and it's also going to go on iTunes or Apple Podcast and all the usual suspects for audio, you can check it out at powerupforprofits.com/podcast rockstar. That's powerupforprofits.com/podcast rockstar. And I'm talking with Sandy Phillips Kirkham. And Sandy, how can people get in touch with you? And for those of you listening, if you want to bring Sandy on your show, this is how you would get in touch with her. So Sandy, how do people reach you?
I have a website. It's just my name. It's a little long. It's Sandy with a Y, Phillips, Phillips, Kirkham, Kirkham. That's my website.com. And then I also have a Facebook page under the same name, Sandy Phillips Kirkham, author. You can find me on that Facebook page as well. I have a Twitter account, which is Sandy Phillips. I think it's Sandy Kirkham 11. They wouldn't let me put all that other in there. But my website, you can go to my website and reach me there. It's probably the best place to reach me.
Okay. And Gerald, who is also known as Brad, asks this question. Since it takes a great deal of time to listen to podcasts as you try and find one that is in your niche, how much time per day do you devote to your podcast work? That's a great question.
Yeah. Now, I probably do something that, again, is probably against advice. I know one of your other guests had talked about they listen to the entire podcast. I don't always listen to the entire podcast. Right. I can get a pretty good feel because that would become very time consuming because a lot of them go to an hour. So I probably listen to 15 minutes of the podcast, and then I get an idea of, and then if I decide I'm going on that podcast, then I'll go back maybe and listen to more of it. It's hard to say how much I spend. Sometimes, like, I will be gung-ho and I'll spend, 2 or 3 hours a day in an entire week, and then I'll go a week without doing anything. So it just depends. But you do have to put the time in. It is time consuming. But the rewards, to me, are worth it. Whatever time I put in, it comes back tenfold to me.
Right.
It absolutely does.
And this is all part of your marketing. I mean, you have to put effort into your marketing. And one of the things that I do is I listen to podcast shows when I go on a run. When it's spring and summer and I'm working in the garden, I'll throw on some podcast shows. So you can be doing other things while you're listening. Right. You don't have to give it 100% of your attention. And so it's really about managing your time. But like you said, Sandy, it does take time. And it pays off because imagine, if you will, that you decide, okay, I'm going to plan for March. I'm doing a book launch in March, and I really want to have a high saturation within the marketplace. And if you started right now and you really put your plan together, and let's say you got 100 shows in March, you would be unstoppable. Your book would hit #1 in categories. I mean, there's so many benefits. And keeping in mind that, again, right now is the perfect time to lay the foundation for what's going to come next. Because as speakers, a lot of us are speakers, we can't go out and speak on the platform. And I'll tell you, that has killed a lot of businesses. I was thinking about this morning with a lot of my friends that are professional speakers, and that was their only source of income.
Right.
And they literally have had to shut their businesses. And these are speakers that speak on leadership, they speak on success, they speak on money, and they're like, okay, what comes next? Lay your foundation now. Take full advantage of the fact that we're in a lockdown overall, and we can't do what we were doing before. So, Sandy, what is your vision for your book, your business, your podcasting in 2021?
I would like to continue to get more podcasts. I'd like to promote the book as well. It's hard because, like I said, sometimes I have to stop and give it a break and give it a breather, basically. And I need to do that for myself. That's just the way I'm still healing from this abuse and still working through some things. But I just envision that I can get better at what I'm doing. And I think there are more opportunities out there that I haven't tapped into yet, because I still haven't, like you said, really decided, okay, here's what I'm going to do to get this number of podcasts. But I have no doubt, and I tell this to people all the time, it's if you put the work in, you will get podcasts. There are podcasters out there looking for you. They want guests on their shows. So if you have a message, if you have a book, if you have a business that you want to promote, it can be done.
Right. And, I want to go back to the point of be sure to know what the show is about, because I cannot tell you the number of times that I get approached for my plant-based eating show. It's real clear. I've got a description that says you absolutely must be 100% plant-based vegan. I mean, there's no exception to that rule. My Power Up for Profit show, that's a different conversation. That's more about business. And I have had so many people that have approached me to be on my plant-based show. And the first question I ask them is, are you 100% plant-based vegan? Well, no. And it's like, well, then we're not even going to have this conversation. And they want me to bend my rules. It's like, I, as the host, am not going to bend my rules for you. And so you need to keep that in mind as you're approaching hosts, that you want to know what their platform is all about. And there's a question that came in from Debbie Stout. She says, do hosts call, text, or email you that you've been accepted for the show? What's your experience, Sandy?
A lot of them will email me through my mail, but a lot of them I'm getting, as I said, I belong to two podcast groups. And so a lot of them go through that. And then the host will contact me after I message them back through my email. Most of the time it's emails. I've never had anybody text me or call me because I don't put that information out.
Okay.
So they're not texting or calling, but it's mostly through emails, I would say.
Okay. And you do want to be careful what information you post out in, cyberspace, because you never know who's going to get hold of it.
The other thing real quick I want to mention, if anyone has written a book, I always send, or at least ask the host, would you like me to send me my book? I always make sure that they get my book. Most of the time they don't read it, and that's fine. But the ones who do, that makes for a really great interview. But I think it's a nice gesture to say, here's my book. And it's yours for the taking. So I do encourage anyone who's written a book that it's going to cost you a little money, but again, it's marketing. It's getting your book out there to say, here's my book, and who knows what they'll do with that book.
Absolutely. Well, I can't tell you how far you've come in the time that we've been working together. It's just like, I'm like, who is this woman? It's like,
if they only knew. This was not the same person.
Oh, this is amazing. I love it. And again, I encourage people, if you want to interview Sandy, go to her website. It's Sandy Phillips Kirkham. We'll put the link in the video so that when you're looking at the video, you'll see it. We'll put the link below. She's a wonderful guest. I do encourage you to reach out, and you can have her on your show. Let's see if there's any other questions. Debbie says, thank you. Honey says, excellent idea. I don't see any other questions. So in closing, Sandy, what are your final thoughts for people?
Just do it. I mean, I know that's a catchphrase, but and I will tell you, I actually enjoy them now. And as much as I was dreading doing podcasts, I think people will find them once you start doing your podcast, you'll enjoy it. And so that's my advice. You just do it, and you will find that it's not as difficult as you think. And be prepared. And whatever Kathleen tells you, just do that too.
Just do it.
Do it.
Okay.
Kathleen knows her stuff.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Honey says, such great ideas from both of these powerful women. Marcia says, thank you, Kathleen and Sandy. Marcia's another one who, when we first started working together,
I know Marcia.
She was dragging her feet. It's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, she does a great interview. I've seen her podcast. Yes,
she does.
Yeah.
And one last question about how many interviews have you done over the last year?
Probably 65 to 70.
Okay. Okay.
And
going
said,
from
a couple
none.
Though 0 to 60. And again, a lot of that was based on the fact that I took a break sometimes. So,
right.
And some of them were repeat. Like I said, I had like 3 that were repeat interviews.
Right. And I really encourage people to look at your reasons for being on a show, because some people say, oh, I want to be on a show so I can make a lot of money right away. I'm going to tell you, this isn't going to happen. It's like, it is not like instant gratification for making money. This is a long-term strategy. This is about positioning your message. I just yesterday got an email from somebody that I've been doing my plant-based show as a passion project for a while. It's like I have not monetized that show. And I just had somebody contact me that all of that effort probably will pay off in spades. And I didn't plan it that way.
No,
It's because I was doing what I was called to do. So do what you're called to do, Sandy. I so appreciate your time. I so appreciate all that you're doing. And you have just grown in leaps and bounds. And I wish you the very best in 2021. And I so appreciate what you're doing to raise awareness around a very important topic. So
thank you,
in closing, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Have a great day.
You
Bye-bye.
too.